They told the children the water was safe, right before it started killing them. For 3 years, in a quiet river town, mothers boiled bottles for their babies, using water that was already poisoned. Doctors saw the rashes. Engineers saw the readings. Officials saw the reports. And every single one of them said nothing. By the time anyone admitted the truth, dozens were already sick. Children stopped growing. Grown men collapsed in fields they had farmed their whole lives. And the town's own leaders, the men sworn to protect it, had known for months. This is not a story from some far-off, forgotten era. This is a story about trust, and what happens when trust is weaponized against the very people who gave it. A town slowly poisoned to death. Not by accident, not overnight, but drop by drop, denial by denial, while the people who could have stopped it chose silence instead. What you're about to hear is buried in old records, faded health reports, and testimony nobody wanted to give. It is the story of an invisible danger that spread through homes, through wells, through bloodstreams, while the people in power decided that protecting their reputation mattered more than protecting human lives. Every detail you're about to hear was once written down, filed away, and forgotten, until now. By the end of this story, you will never trust a routine inspection the same way again. So tell me, if you knew the water in your own home was slowly killing your family, how long do you think it would take before someone told you the truth? Picture a town built on a river, the kind of place where life moved at the pace of the current. Families had lived there for generations. Industry had arrived decades earlier, bringing jobs, prosperity, and a sense of permanence. The factories hummed day and night. Smoke curled into the sky, and nobody questioned it, because smoke meant work, and work meant survival. Beneath the surface, something else was moving. Waste from the plants didn't vanish. It seeped into the soil, into the groundwater, into the very wells families had used for 50 years without a second thought. The danger was invisible, tasteless, and utterly silent. It didn't announce itself with a single dramatic event. It crept in slowly, the way rot creeps through a house nobody bothers to inspect. The first warnings came early, far earlier than anyone in power was willing to admit. Independent researchers flagged unusual chemical traces. A handful of local doctors began noticing strange patterns. Children with mysterious rashes, adults with unexplained fatigue, livestock dying without cause. Each report was filed. Each report was buried. Local officials had a choice. They could investigate, disrupt the town's main employer, and risk economic collapse. Or they could look away. They looked away. For years, families kept drinking, kept bathing, kept feeding their infants formula, mixed with water that was already, quietly, turning against them. And then, in a routine inspection that almost never happened, a single technician found something in the soil samples that should not have been there at all. Something that had been there for years. The technician's discovery was a number, a contamination reading so far beyond safe limits that the lab initially assumed their equipment had failed. It hadn't. The groundwater beneath the town carried industrial byproducts that had been leaching from unlined waste pits for the better part of a decade. Internal memos, later uncovered in archives nobody expected to survive, revealed something far worse than negligence. Company officials had known about contamination risks years before the public did. One internal document warned executives that continued dumping posed a significant risk to surrounding water supplies. That document was filed away. Production continued. Health records from the era paint a portrait almost too painful to read. Birth defects climbed. Miscarriage rates rose without explanation. Entire blocks of the town reported clusters of rare illnesses that individually seemed like terrible misfortune, but together formed an unmistakable pattern. Pattern was something the authorities refused to acknowledge, because acknowledging it meant accepting responsibility. Then came the moment that changed everything. A local nurse, working off the clock, compiled her own informal map marking every illness, every death, every reported symptom by address. When she overlaid it onto a map of the underground water flow, the cluster lined up almost perfectly, with the contamination plume spreading from the factory grounds. She brought it to officials. They dismissed her data as anecdotal. They told her, point blank, that her map was not scientific evidence. It would take outside investigators, leaked internal documents, and mounting public pressure before the truth could no longer be denied. The water had been unsafe for years. The people in charge had known, and the silence that followed wasn't an oversight. It was a decision, made over and over again, by people who understood exactly what they were protecting, and exactly who they were sacrificing to protect it. When the truth finally surfaced, it spread faster than the contamination itself. National headlines turned the town's name into shorthand for corporate betrayal. Investigations followed. Lawsuits followed. For a moment, it seemed like justice might actually arrive. But justice, in stories like this, rarely arrives the way we hope. Civil settlements were paid, but spread across so many families that individual compensation barely covered medical bills, let alone decades of suffering. Several executives resigned quietly. A few faced fines. Almost none faced prison. The system that had allowed the poisoning to continue for years proved remarkably efficient at protecting the people responsible for it. Meanwhile, the families who lived through it carried consequences that no settlement could erase. Children who grew up exposed to contaminated water now faced long-term health complications. As adults, some moved away, unable to trust their own homes again. Others stayed, bound by roots too deep to pull up, living in the shadow of what had happened beneath their feet. This story still matters today because the pattern never disappeared. Across the world, similar warnings are still being filed, and similarly buried. Communities are still being told their water is safe by officials who have every incentive to say so, and very little incentive to verify it. The technology has changed. The willingness to prioritize profit over people has not. What happened in this town wasn't a freak accident of history. It was a preview, a warning written in poisoned water, ignored once and ignored again wherever the same conditions exist today. Wherever power has more to lose from the truth than from the silence. History rarely repeats with explosions or headlines. More often, it repeats quietly in a filed report nobody reads, in a warning nobody escalates, in a community that trusts the people who are supposed to protect them, right up until the moment that trust is proven worthless. This town's tragedy wasn't caused by a single villain. It was caused by dozens of small, deniable choices, each one easy to justify in the moment, each one devastating in hindsight. That is how silence becomes complicity, one quiet decision at a time. Maybe the real lesson isn't about water, or factories, or even the decade this happened in. Maybe it's about how easily comfort can be mistaken for safety, and how dangerous it is to assume that someone, somewhere, is always watching out for us. So before you close this video, ask yourself, what's being filed away, unexamined, in your own town right now? Tell me in the comments, what part of this story disturbed you the most? And if stories like this deserve to be remembered instead of buried, consider subscribing, because history has a habit of repeating itself on anyone who stops paying attention.